Last weekend, our son graduated from college. It was a glorious day. Sometime during that morning, it dawned on me how much I love commencement ceremonies. The processions, in Sam's case, behind bagpipers in black and gold kilts. The professors, all dressed in fancy robes with velvet hoods and funny hats. The parents and grandparents, proud and wistful and weepy, bonded to each other by a shared affection for our kids. And the graduates, who, whether from the recognition that comes with this day or the sense of relief, are practically glowing, every one of them beaming, every face shining and grinning and beautiful. In the midst of the joyous pomp and circumstance, I also appreciate the speeches, both the ones from graduating seniors, which allow the larger audience to eavesdrop on inside jokes and grant a glimpse into what life on campus is really like, and the ones given by guests, the honorees, invited to come in to offer a commencement address to a crowd eager to take in all the meaning of this important occasion. The secular version of sermons, the best addresses, it seems to me, are distillations of hard-earned wisdom drawn from the speaker's own life experience, reflections of their own inner life and their perspective on the outer world. The best ones speak of courage and include a charge to the next generation of adults to lean forward, bringing all their gifts and years of learning to be a force for good in the world and to create a more hopeful future. At Sam's graduation, Ibu Patel gave the commencement address. Perhaps best known for his work with Chicago's Interfaith Youth Corps, he brings young people of different faiths together to encourage them to engage in dialogue and service. In his speech last weekend, he urged students to dare to be the bridge builders our country and our world desperately need. Not the ones who focus only on finding fault in the structures others have created, but to build something themselves that is connective and life-giving. The world, he said, belongs to the leader, not the critic, the builder, not the scolder. Some years ago, New York Times columnist David Brooks said something similar when he challenged new college graduates to eschew the American obsession with self-fulfillment and instead to find themselves in service to others by making what he described as sacred commitments and by rising to the challenges they discover outside of themselves. Most successful people, Brooks offered, don't look inside and then plan a life. They look outside and find a problem which summons their life. They are called by a problem, and the self is constructed gradually by their calling. The most memorable commencement address I ever heard was given by J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter. Remarkably, she began her speech to students at Harvard by talking about failure, about the failures of her own young adult life, the dissolution of a short-lived marriage which left her as a single mother, jobless, poor, and nearly homeless. While acknowledging that a confession of failure at this current point in her life might strike with the force of a cartoon anvil, she noted that at the time she was living it, she certainly didn't know how long the dark tunnel extended. She spoke of the fear and the stress and the 1,000 hardships and humiliations that come with poverty. But she also noted how the experience of being down and low and on the edge shaped her, how it taught her things about herself she could have learned in no other way. She discovered that it's possible to emerge from failure wiser and stronger, more secure in your ability to survive and in the strength of your relationships, and more clearly focused on what it is that you are uniquely called to do with your life. A knowledge which, however tested by adversity and however painfully won, was for her worth more than any accomplishment she ever earned. Rock bottom, she said, became the solid foundation on which she rebuilt her life. J.K. Rowling then looked out at the audience when she declared, "You might never fail on the scale that I did, but some failure in life is inevitable. It is impossible to live without failing at something unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default." She then went on to talk about the importance of imagination, not merely as the capacity to tell bedtime stories or to invent and innovate, but in a larger and more transformative way. Imagination is the capacity to empathize with people whose experience you have never shared. In her early 20s, she worked at the headquarters of Amnesty International's African Research Department, where she read hastily scribbled letters and saw photographs of torture and execution victims, smuggled out of totalitarian regimes by men and women who risked imprisonment to inform the outside world of what was happening to them. Every day, she saw more evidence of the evils some people inflicted on other human beings. And yet, at the same time, she also learned about the depths of human goodness. As concerned bystanders, thousands of them, people who had never experienced torture, whose well-being was secure, joined one another in collective action to save others they did not know and would never meet. They raised their voices to amplify the voices of the suppressed and the silenced. They used their power on behalf of the powerless. As J.K. Rowling put it, "We do not need magic to change the world. We carry the power we need inside ourselves already. We have the power to imagine better." We might call that power the Holy Spirit. On the day of Pentecost, the day the Spirit flew in and fired up the disciples, the book of Acts tells us they were all gathered together in one place, huddled together in a room in Jerusalem, praying, regrouping, wondering what would come next. They were the followers of Jesus, and they had followed him all over the countryside, listening to his teaching about the last being first and the lost being found, witnessing how his ministry had extended welcome and crossed boundaries and brought healing. But while his ministry had been powerful, it had also ended badly. So many people had believed in him and pinned their hopes on him, and yet in the end, as you know, he was betrayed, arrested, tried, sentenced to death, and executed on a cross. Down that long, dark tunnel, there were 1,000 hardships and humiliations. He suffered. He died. He was buried. By all appearances, it seems he had failed his followers, and his followers, they had failed him too. But then Easter arrives. Christ is raised and appears to his disciples. Whatever you might think about the resurrection, what becomes abundantly clear is that the story's not over. What also becomes clear is that by his ministry, by his dying and rising, the disciples are changed. In following him down and low and to the edge, their own lives are reshaped. They learn things he could have taught them in no other way, about the lengths that God goes to be with us and for us, about the love that cannot be killed and will never die, about the power of compassion and the power of forgiveness, about the resilience of true and beloved community, and about what it means to follow Jesus even though he is no longer right there in front of us. Rock bottom, it turns out, is the solid foundation on which the church was built. It's in that place where the disciples huddle together in an upper room in Jerusalem. The first time they gathered like that, it was for the Last Supper on the night before Jesus died. The second time, it's after his death, and they are afraid